Hello, and welcome to this very special year-end Ropes event. My name is Ben Birnbaum, and I'm the founder of Ropes. We were thrilled to have more than 300 people sign up for today's event. And I know that many of you are joining us for the first time, so you might be wondering to yourself, what is Ropes and what makes it different from other peace organizations? Well, the answer is that we are a regional peace organization. The R in Ropes stands for regional, and we believe that if you want to see peace between Israelis and Palestinians in our lifetime, we need to have more than Israelis and Palestinians at the table. We need the governments of the region, and just as importantly, the young leaders of the region to be part of the solution. So at Ropes, we run people-to-people programs that bring together not just Israeli and Palestinian emerging leaders, as 99% of peace organizations do, but also their peers from across the Middle East and North Africa. In recent years, Ropes has run 11 intensive programs in locations across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. These include our annual summits, where we bring regional emerging leaders together for 3 to 4 days of learning and bonding. We also run dual narrative tours of Israel and the West Bank for all these Arab emerging leaders. This year, with the support of the State Department, we launched an intensive conflict journalism program for journalists. And we also have an education exchange initiative for university students that we're thrilled to be expanding in 2025 with the support of the European Union. Through these various programs, we've built an alumni network of more than 130 emerging leaders from Israel, the Palestinian territories, 12 Arab countries, and even non-Arab Muslim countries like Iran and Afghanistan. And you're going to meet 4 of those extraordinary leaders in the second half of this program. This has been a hugely challenging year for all organizations working on this issue, and we are no exception. But I think it speaks to the durability of our approach that under great stress, we managed to run 4 major programs this year, twice as many as the year before. And despite their differences of opinion, our alumni network has remained active and cohesive. And with your help, we plan to double the size of that network in 2025 through an accelerated programming calendar. Now at Ropes, we pride ourselves on being extremely efficient with limited resources. People look at what we're able to do and they see our budget and are shocked at what we're able to pull off. But this work, of course, does cost money. And as we seek to dramatically expand our work in the year ahead, we also need to expand our budget. So earlier this year, we set a $1 million fundraising goal. And thanks to so many of you, we are now 85% of the way there. So we still have to raise about $150,000 in the remaining 10 days. And we're hoping to be able to raise a good chunk of that on this call today. So whether you've been following us for a while and are encouraged by our progress under challenging circumstances, or if you're joining us for the first time today and are inspired by what you hear on this program, I hope you'll consider making a tax-deductible contribution at a level that's right for you. If you'd like to contribute, you can use the QR code on the corner of the screen, or visit ropes.org/donate for more information. Now, Ropes would have never gotten off the ground in its early years, but for the many people who believed in our approach long before the Abraham Accords. And one of the people to whom we are most indebted is someone I had the honor of getting to know as a young journalist, Dennis Ross. Ambassador Ross was actually the first person to join the Ropes Advisory Board back in 2017. He has spent his life fighting for Middle East peace, and I'm incredibly grateful to him for his ongoing support of Ropes. And to properly introduce Ambassador Ross and moderate today's Q&A, it's my pleasure to welcome Ropes Executive Director Ksenia Svetlova. Before Ropes, Ksenia served as a member of Knesset from 2015 to 2019, and was also an intrepid journalist who reported across the Middle East, from the Gaza Strip to Tahrir Square to Syria, and even Hezbollah strongholds in Lebanon. In her 2 years as executive director, Ksenia has brought Ropes to new heights, and I know that under her continued leadership, the organization will continue to flourish. Ksenia, take it away.
Ksenia, you're muted.
What?
Ksenia is muted. I'm not hearing it. Yeah,
Oh.
okay.
So I was just saying, Ben, that I would say tons of nice things about you. God knows you deserve it, but we are running on a very tough schedule today. We want to use our time wisely and to have as much as possible questions that I encourage you to send now to our chat box, and so that Ambassador Ross will be able to answer them. I think that it's very important that we are meeting today in the end of the year, because this was well, it was a horrible year. It was a very bad year for, I think, everyone here in the Middle East. It's important to talk about what happened, but also about the prognosis for the future. Everybody, right now in this holiday season, and right now this week we will celebrate here. We will celebrate Hanukkah. The Christians will celebrate the Christmas, and of course, all of us will celebrate the New Year's. And we, of course, hope that this new year will be much better for each and everybody of us. But in order for it to make it better, we need to understand first what happened here, and what can we do as a collective self in order to improve things for us, for our children, for everybody here in the Middle East. So in ROPES, we basically provide, this tiny sliver of hope by continuous action. This is what we do, because we know that we don't have the luxury to stop. And when 10/7 happened, and when the war in Gaza happened, we said, well, we are not giving up. We just cannot afford it to ourselves. So therefore, we continued with our programming, and we definitely, as Ben said, we intend to do even more during the next year. And we are starting this year with very unique education program in Morocco that is designed for 30 university and grad students who will be discussing the Middle East from a regional perspective, not the divisive one, as it usually happens all across the campuses in the Middle East, but also in the West, but from the point of view of a region, how we can improve this region, how we can make it tick, how we can make it a more livable place. So a lot of our alumni are featured in our podcast, the Ropecast, and we encourage you to follow it. We feature their voices, pro-peace voices from all across the Middle East, from the United States, from our friends in the European Union. And of course, we bring a lot of people who engaged in our programs, emerging leaders from all across the Middle East. And yes, we are counting on your support. We are very grateful for your continuous support over the years. And there is a chance to do even more right now by scanning the QR code in the bottom of the page. And this is something that if you want to do it, you can do it now, or you can do it later through our website, ropes.org. Now, without further ado, I want to introduce a very special person, Ambassador Ross, who for many years he played a leading role in shaping U.S. involvement in the Middle East peace process as the U.S. point man to both the first Bush and Clinton administrations. And he was instrumental in helping Israelis and Palestinians reach the 95 interim agreement and 97 Hebron agreement, facilitated the 1994 Israel-Jordan peace treaty, Wadi Araba, and intensively worked to bring Israel and Syria together, something that we will discuss it now, Ambassador Ross, might still happen, who knows, after the fall of the Assad regime. Later, he served 2.5 years as a special assistant to President Obama and as National Security Council Senior Director for the Central Region, spending the first 6 months of the administration as a special advisor on Iran to Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Ambassador Ross is a distinguished fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, don't miss their publications, and the author of 5 books on peace process, the Middle East, and international relations. Ambassador Ross, the floor is yours. We are waiting for your opening remarks, and then we will go to Q&A, please.
All right, great. Look, thanks for having me. I'm really pleased to take part in this. As Ben said, I was kind of the founding board member of ROPES, because ROPES is basically built on a premise. And the premise is that Israeli-Palestinian peace is possible if it's also put in a larger context of the region. The regional states can actually play a major role in a way that maybe they haven't in the past. But I would say the possibility of that actually increases as we look to the future. As Ksenia has said, this has been a really difficult year. On the other hand, as you look at where we are right now, the landscape of the Middle East as we've known it has changed fundamentally. Hamas still exists, but it doesn't exist any longer as a military. Hezbollah has been decimated, has lost its leadership, lost most of its rockets, and with the fall of the Assad regime, the land bridge, the logistics bridge that Iran used to be able to build and sustain Hezbollah is also now gone. Iran itself is dramatically weaker than it was, partly because Israel has taken out all of its strategic air defenses, 90% of its ballistic missile producing capability, and domestically, if you look at what's going on in Iran today, quite apart from what happened militarily, it is suffering from profound energy shortages, which seems rather ironic for a country that has both oil and natural gas. It is having to shut off major industries, having to have education in schools go online. There is no question that you're looking at a region right now where what the Iranians called the axis of resistance, what I actually call the axis of misery, is dramatically weaker than it was. It was one of the major impediments to peacemaking. You go back to October 7th, 2023, one of the reasons that Hamas acted when it did was because it thought that there was going to be normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. That normalization isn't going to take place without an approach on the Palestinian side. That will obviously require changes on the part of the current Israeli government. But the reality is a landscape that, as we've known it, is quite different than it's been. And that actually argues for trying to do more right now, not less. Even if the politics here make it difficult, one of the things to understand is that building relationships, networks between emerging leaders who are not caught up with the same old narratives, who are not bound by the same sets of assumptions that created, in a sense, an inability to think differently or to act differently. If we're going to build peace in the future, you build it on a political vision, you build it from the ground up, but you build it by building relationships. And one of the things that Ropes is designed to do is to build those relationships. You have, and you're going to hear in the second half of this program, you're going to hear from some of the alumni. They speak, they represent, they're kind of the emblem of what Ropes stands for, but they're also the emblem of what I'm talking about. I remain an optimist, which may seem difficult for anybody to embrace, but I remain an optimist for one reason. There isn't an alternative. Between Israelis and Palestinians, you can't wish either of them away. Israel isn't going to go anyplace, but the Palestinians are not going to disappear. And they have to find a way to live together. It looks difficult right now, but if the climate in the region changes, if those that have been the major impediments to peacemaking are dramatically weaker, you have a Trump administration coming in. Clearly, this president would like to receive a Nobel Prize, Peace Prize. This president says he wants to expand the Abraham Accords. And to be able to do that, the United States is going to have to play a role, but it's going to have to basically work with Arab leaders and create a set of connections that we really haven't seen. So I look to the future right now as creating possibilities. As difficult as the current situation is, you got to start by ending the war in Gaza because Hamas has been defeated militarily. I don't think we're that far from that. You end the war in Gaza. I think the potential for a Saudi-Israeli normalization agreement is quite real. It will, as I said, require a Palestinian dimension. And if you have questions, we can talk about what that might look like. But in any case, I think as you look to this coming year and you look to organizations that are really trying to build peace in a very practical way, in a systematic way, I think Ropes is one of the few that is doing that on a people-to-people basis. You can't make peace without people, and it starts with a people-to-people approach. So that's one of the reasons I was happy to join the board in 2017 when Ben approached me. So why don't I stop there and I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Ross. As always, with very few words, but you said, of course, a lot. So I will use my prerogative as a moderator to ask you the first question, but I will, of course, add to that one of the questions that we already have in the Q&A chat box. And I also encourage all of you to use the upvote feature for the Q&A so that you can also basically engage with other people questions and so on. A lot of stuff, fun stuff here on Zoom. And I will ask you, of course, the question about what you just mentioned, the Palestinian dimension. Okay, Palestinian dimension means many different things for many different people. For us, it means the two-state solution, because we in Ropes think that, well, no, perhaps other creative formula, exists right now. But it means less than a state, for example, for Netanyahu during the last 10 years when he was speaking of state minus. And it can also mean, well, for some of the politicians, empty promise that does not even has any substance to it, just a lip service, basically. And there is a question here from Matthias Kronmeier, dear friend, what will replace the two-state solution as a possible settlement of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? What is the lasting value of the Oslo process? I think it's all connected. Please, Ambassador.
Look, one of the ways you deal with your question is to start by explaining why there's no such thing as a one-state solution. The right in Israel thinks you can have one state and you can somehow suppress the Palestinians and they'll lose their national identity. They will not. The left thinks that Israel can disappear and Israelis and Palestinians can live together in one state, which ignores the fact that you have two national identities that are not going to disappear. Two national movements competing for the same space. Look around the Middle East. Do we have any state that has more than one national, tribal, sectarian identity? Any state in the Middle East that has multiple identities that's at peace? The answer is no. It's either paralyzed, failed, or failing. That's not the future you want for Israelis and Palestinians. So you start by understanding there is not a one-state solution. One state is a prescription for an endless conflict. Now, two states is going to be very hard to produce. Right now, you have an Israeli government that wouldn't accept it. But frankly, on the Palestinian side, if you had one state today, it would be a failed state. So we have to start with an understanding of where we are. We have two parallel societies, Israeli and Palestinian, that are both suffering trauma. For Israelis, it's still October 7th, 2023, for a lot of different reasons, not the least of which is you still have hostages. But there's also the trauma that and a fear that a Palestinian state would be led by Hamas. So you have to, if you're going to have a Palestinian state emerge at some point, it has to be a state that doesn't emerge until, in fact, it demonstrates it will meet a series of conditions. I've often said that it's very important for the U.S. to recognize the Palestinians as a people, and as a people, they have a right to self-determination. But that right only gets exercised after they demonstrate that they can actually have a state. Not have it led by extremists, not be aligned with Iran, not have multiple independent militias, not have a state that's characterized by corruption. So there's the absence of the rule of law. There's a lot of things that Palestinians need, or benchmarks that they would need to demonstrate on the way to statehood. On the Israeli side, you can't ask the Palestinians to meet a series of conditions and then have Israel on the ground act unilaterally in a way that makes it impossible to have a Palestinian state. So here's again a role that the United States can play, where it focuses on the kind of steps that both sides must be able to take to preserve two states as an option. We can talk about two states as a vision. It's not realistic to say you can have two states anytime soon, but you want to be acting in a way that increases at least the potential for it to emerge. And here I bring in the Saudis. The Saudis will require, when I say a Palestinian dimension, they want a credible pathway to a Palestinian state. Now, a credible pathway is one that, can have a time target, but it also has to have a set of conditions that will be met. And the long and short of this is start by understanding that one state is not an option unless you want a forever conflict. And neither side is ready today for two states, but you create a pathway that starts with people-to-people relations, both between Israelis and Palestinians, to remind everybody that cooperation on a functional basis is possible. People tend to forget, whether it's health or environment or water or treating sewage, Israelis and Palestinians, even today, have a functional relationship. We need to highlight that and show it, because Israelis and Palestinian publics don't think that cooperation is possible. You have to remind them that actually it is possible, it takes place. You have to focus on creating some kind of a vision for the future, and then you have to work on the relationship between Arab states and Israel, where Arab states like Saudi Arabia can say, we're ready to make peace, but here's what we would require from you on the Palestinians. Work at all of those levels, and you can get from where we are to where we need to go.
We'll of course add that not only sewage and water, but also security apparatus that are working together, security services in the Palestinian Autonomy and in Israel since '93 and until this day, almost uninterrupted despite all of the turmoil. There is a question from Paul Arts. Do you think that the Abraham Accords, with or without Saudi Arabia, do serve the way to a solid solution of a Palestinian conflict?
Well, I think you have to understand what produced the Abraham Accords. People often ask me the question, how are the Abraham Accords changing the region? I said, it's a good question, but it's not the right one. The right question is, how is the region changing so the Abraham Accords became possible? And what was happening is that, especially in the Gulf leaders were looking at the Palestinian leadership and seeing it unable to do anything on its own behalf. And they basically said, why should we deny ourselves what's important to our own interests if the Palestinian leaders aren't prepared to do what is necessary on their part? So that's what there were a lot of factors. There was a common sense of common threat perception. There was something deeper going on as well. Many of the Gulf states began focusing on the need to create good governance. And that meant delivering services. And they looked around, to have that, what do we need? Well, we need to have water security. We need to have food security. We need to have health security. We need to have cyber security. And who's cutting edge in all those areas? The Israelis are. So there's a natural relationship here that began because of common security concerns and threats, but it evolved because of these deeper reasons that related to the well-being of these countries, the leaderships who said we need to build resilient economies, we need to build resilient societies. We're not necessarily talking about democracy, but we're talking about good governance. And we've seen that emerge in Gulf states. Much decent governance, good governance, and they saw a relationship with Israel as being of help to them. That still exists, and that's not changing. Now, what has changed in the last year is the images coming out of Gaza. What's interesting in Israel, people are consumed by their own sense of loss and the cost. They don't see what's happening in Gaza. You sit here in Israel, you don't see any of the images of Gaza on TV or in social media. You go to the Arab world, you see that all the time. And that's soured the atmosphere. So you have to get an end to the war in Gaza. You have to begin to create a transition in Gaza, begin to create a pathway to reconstruction there. That will change the atmosphere. And then you bring back Arab states much more into the mix. Then the Abraham Accords still exist. Nobody walked away from them, but they basically have been in a kind of cold storage. They're not moving forward. They're not moving backward. If they're going to expand, you need to get beyond the war. If you're going to see the expansion to Saudi Arabia, you're going to, again, need to get beyond the war, and you need to see a kind of transition taking place. I do think this will happen in the coming year for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is, as I said, Hamas has already been defeated as a military. It has lost most of its military infrastructure. It is still, I think there's an alternative to Hamas in Gaza that can be created after a kind of transition period. I think that's what we'll see in 2025, a transition period in Gaza that will help the larger approach to peace building.
Our next question is from Jim Grant, and it actually is connected to what we were just saying now about steps that need to happen so that we will be in a better place in 2025. Will Trump administration bring the efforts to achieve peace in the Middle East? How can the US be taken seriously when its representatives in the second administration are unqualified in the offices that they will hold, including Secretary of State? Okay, so the person who asked it specifically wrote that he will show his bias. But then again, there is a question about, I think that also not only about qualification, but about the intentions. And it has to do also with Iran and with Syria, and of course with us, Israel and Palestine.
Look, the interesting thing about President Trump is that when he identifies priorities, one of his priorities is basically expansion of the Abraham Accords, and he means a deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Well, it won't happen by itself. if the Trump administration wants, excuse me, if the Trump administration wants it to happen, it's going to have to make an effort. If the Trump administration wants it to happen, it'll have to invest in it. Here in Israel, if Ben-Gvir and Smotrich are the arbiters of decision-making, it won't happen. I think it'll be very difficult for Prime Minister Netanyahu to say no to Trump. I think the last thing in the world he wants to do is be seen as saying no to Trump. So a lot will depend upon if Trump says, in fact, he wants this, is he prepared to act in a way that reflects that? Is he prepared to make it clear what kind of actions have to stop and what kind of actions do we need to see? And by the way, it needs to come from everybody. It's not what he asks of Israel also needs to be reflected in terms of what he asks of the Saudis, what he asks of the Palestinians. The interesting thing is, as he comes in, everybody seems to want to have a relationship with him. I mean, there's a period where everybody wants to be on the right side of the new American president, especially this American president. Now, if you don't take advantage of that quickly, everyone gets used to the idea of not necessarily being responsive. So there's a window here. You start by ending the war, because once you end the war, a lot of things become possible. Until you end the war, it's going to be difficult. I'm hoping that even between now and the end of the Biden administration, we'll see some changes. It may just be a hostage deal, but it could be beyond that. It could be, again, you talk about an end to the war. It's two ways to get the hostages out. One is you do a hostage deal, and it's tied to different phases. That seems to be what we're back to, and maybe that's the most likely outcome, where you have a ceasefire for 45 to 60 days to start with. Then even if you have that ceasefire, you still have to be prepared to do something after that. An alternative has always been Prime Minister Netanyahu says, okay, we're ready to end the war now, provided the hostages are released. What Hamas has said all along is release the hostages when the war ends. I'm not entirely convinced that even in the current discussions, we're totally beyond that. Yeah, I hope we are, so that we get this deal. But we've seen this multiple times before. I've on at least 5 occasions, I've heard how close we are to a deal. I think it's different this time because Hamas is truly alone, because Sinwar is gone, because the external Hamas is in much more of a decision-making role. And so I think it's more likely, but until it happens, we can't be fully confident.
We have just a few more minutes for the Q&A, but so I will be asking a few questions together on the similar topics. So one of them is on Syria, but actually more or even on the Gulf states. So the question is, first of all, what's your take on what is happening in Syria and Syria's future? Just a tiny small question that you can answer in half a minute. And then the other question is, will the need for the region to get the future of Syria right lead the Gulf states to be proactive and steadily engaged in shaping events, including Syria and Lebanon, and also Israel and Palestine?
Yeah. Well, look, there's a lot of unknowns right now. It is interesting that Ahmed al-Shara, who is now going by his given name, is sending all the right kinds of messages about inclusion, about respecting minorities, about tolerance for minorities. We'll have to see it in action. There's a 4-month transition period that's been set up. You have an existing Security Council Resolution 2254 that called for the drafting of a constitution on an inclusive basis, meaning all the different segments of Syria public would be represented. Within 18 months, that would be done, and you have elections. It'll be interesting to see, will HTS, will Ahmed al-Shara, will in fact we see a kind of stability? Will there be a kind of struggle for power? We are not seeing it yet, but we are seeing, I think, with Turkey, with the Syrian National Army seemingly trying to remove what is the autonomous Kurdish area that's led by the Syrian Democratic Forces, which has been the American partner in terms of fighting ISIS. are we going to will the U.S. be able to limit that conflict so that doesn't overtake at least part of what's happening in Syria and allow ISIS to reemerge? So there's a lot of questions that have to be answered. We're in the beginning stages of this. We saw the collapse of a regime that was completely rotten to its core, that carried out unspeakable atrocities. We've already seen at least one mass grave of 100,000 people discovered. This is a country that was run by a family clique that basically treated the country as its own preserve. It was a kleptocracy. The economic situation there, 90% of the public is maybe living, at the poverty level. A generation of kids have not been in school. 12 million refugees, 5 million on the outside, 7 million internally. The needs of Syria are huge. Is it possible to carry out a transition that is stable, that respects a set of rules? We're going to see.
So we have just 2 minutes left, actually, but there are a lot of questions about the role of Turkey. That seems to be the rising power after the fall of the Assad regime. How do you assess the rise of Turkey and possible implications, for regional security, specifically for Israel also?
Look, I think Turkey is clearly the dominant power in Syria right now. They materially supported HTS. They're acting because they see an opportunity to remove what they see as a Kurdish autonomous area, which they view as being connected to the PKK. The fact is, will they respect limits? Here, I think the U.S., again, has some leverage. Turkey would like us to lift the sanctions on Syria. Turkey has 3.2 million Syrian refugees. They would like them to be able to return. They're not going to be able to return unless you can begin a process of reconstruction. Not going to have reconstruction if you don't have stability. So Turkey has its own interest in stability in Syria, has its own interest in terms of seeing reconstruction. Our ability to lift sanctions, our ability to manage a process where there can be reconstruction. Turkey itself will benefit from that from a lot of standpoints, including a lot of its own contractors will play a major role. So they have huge stakes. We have the ability to help make that possible. If we see Turkey acting in a responsible way, we can proceed in a way that is very helpful to Turkey. If we see them not acting in a responsible way, the kind of things they want from us, they're not going to get. Now, it's interesting, President Erdogan, valued his relationship with President Trump. Here again, I hope that President Trump has enough of an interest, because if he has enough of an interest in understanding the stability in Syria will affect everything else we're trying to do, then here again, he will use the leverage we have. And I hope he does.
I apologize to everybody who sent fascinating questions really about internal dynamics in Israel, about Trump administration, about the succession in Palestinian autonomy. Unfortunately, we do not have the time, but we are trying to take some screenshots of the questions, and maybe we will ask after the session of Ambassador Ross to answer a couple of them, and we will publish the answers in our social media, LinkedIn account and Twitter account. But for now, I'm turning the microphone back to you. Ben, please. Thank you very much, Ambassador.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ksenia. Thank you, Ambassador Ross. And I really want to thank the many of you who have already made contributions to ROPES on this call. We really appreciate your support. And it's now my pleasure to welcome 4 of the more than 130 emerging leaders that make up the ROPES growing network. And when I say emerging leader, I don't use that term lightly. These are young members of parliament, young diplomats, venture capitalists, entrepreneurs, journalists, social media influencers, and leaders in the worlds of culture and science. And when it comes to the Arab-Israeli conflict, they don't always agree on the history, and they certainly don't agree on what's been happening in the present. But they are united by a shared vision for the future, a future in which the state of Israel and an independent state of Palestine are at peace with each other, and more importantly, are fully integrated into the broader region. And I'm going to introduce them now one by one. Dr. Abdulaziz Al-Shayan is a researcher from Saudi Arabia who focuses on the kingdom's foreign policy strategies. He is the Geopolitics Senior Research Fellow and Director of Research with ORF Middle East in Dubai. Also previously a visiting think tanker at the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington. And from 2019 to 2021, Abdulaziz was appointed a lecturer of international relations at the University of Essex. He is invited frequently to provide analysis on Saudi affairs in Saudi and international media. And Abdulaziz participated in our recent summit in Azerbaijan. Hevi Buzo is the founder and executive director of Yalla Productions and host of The Yalla Show, a platform amplifying inspirational voices and promoting peace in the Middle East and North Africa. Born and raised in Damascus, Syria, Hevi previously served as Washington bureau chief of Orient News, where she hosted The Axis, a highly related political show broadcast in over 60 countries and viewed by millions. She also hosted the first English radio show in Syrian history called Afternoon Drive on Mix FM. Manar Sharif is a peace activist and journalist of Palestinian and Syrian origin, who spent many years living in Gaza. She is a journalist by profession and organizes youth dialogue forums and civic initiatives. Her work fosters a culture of tolerance and has enabled young people to form creative connections across regional boundaries. And she is currently studying at Concordia University. And I want to begin with Abdulaziz. Aziz, are you with me? Well, Aziz, I was happy to make my first visit to Saudi Arabia back in May. And we at Ropes are certainly planning to do a lot more work there. And clearly, it's a country that's in transition. And vis-a-vis the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I think the interesting tension is that the population as a whole and the kingdom has been historically very, very supportive of the Palestinian cause. But clearly at the top, there is a desire to normalize relations in Israel for Saudi personal interests. And clearly the current administration has been working at that, and the next administration intends to do that. So my first question to you is, what do you expect to become of those negotiations? Do you expect them to succeed? And specifically, what do you think the Saudi government is going to demand on the Palestinian front, as Ambassador Ross was referencing, in order to get a deal that they can sell to their people?
Well, firstly, Ben, I just want to thank you very much for inviting me, and I want to thank Ksenia and for this really amazing organization that you guys developed that I'm very happy to partake in. So, as to your question, I think as a Saudi researcher who focuses on Saudi policy towards Israel, also, it's a very elusive situation many times, and I think I've studied a great deal regarding the Saudi policy towards Israel, and a lot of the times it's been very ambiguous and fluid, and but I think in recent years there's been a great deal of excitement, but I think also there's been a great deal of I would say sensationalization a lot of the times, and I think these sensationalization narratives have been mostly focused on or aimed towards political gains, and a lot of people are trying to I would say distort the idea of peace and normalization. One of the things I think we have to do in order to see any real materialization of normalization in the future is to fuse the notion of peace and normalization. I think there was a time where normalization and peace has become so far apart that there was a lot of, I would say, point scoring, and there was a lot of attempts of trying to use Saudi Arabia to circumnavigate the Palestinian issue. And I think why this issue of, why should we focus on Saudi Arabia in particular and really engage in this constructively is because we could not only have a win-win situation, but a win-win-win-win situation where a lot of people can win. We could all achieve not just our interests, but really our, desired goal of achieving a two-state solution. And like Dennis Ross, like you all, like many others also, I refuse to give up on that idea. And that's precisely why I engage as much as I can.
Thank you so much, Aziz. And I also wanted to ask you about your ropes experience. You're one of 3 of our Saudi alumni. And
Yeah.
so what was it when I approached you that attracted you to the organization? And maybe tell us a little bit about your experience in Azerbaijan. I can say that you definitely won the karaoke award. That's a universal opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was second to you, I have to say. I was second to you. But for me, I think, to be very honest with you, I really enjoyed. This is going to sound very technical, but the political framing of it. That I felt safe, comfortable going to a place knowing that this is geared towards peace and geared towards the right way, in the right way. For me personally, I've also tried in my endeavor of trying to engage as much as I could with others. I think there were other initiatives out there that try to engage with people from the Gulf and try to steer them away from kind of the Palestinian issue gradually. I think what really got me not only there, but I was very proud and happy, and I put my name on the Times of Israel thing, on the Times of Israel piece, because that is precisely where I want to be positioned. And for me, I'll say this, and I'll wrap up. For me, I saw a great deal of initiatives that, in theory, I had in theory that if there was only Palestinian and Israeli ventures, then perhaps the region could be incentivized in supporting. And so I saw that there. I saw that in Ropes. And I think this is precisely why these kinds of ventures need to be amplified and shown, and require a lot more awareness to attract a great deal of investments from the region and also outside the region. And so, as the ambassador said, I think we need to focus on the building blocks of the two-state solution, but never move away from it. That has to be the horizon, and that's the only horizon. Otherwise, it's not only going to be bad for Palestinians or Israelis, it's going to be really bad for the entire region, and that's why it's a regional approach.
Thank you so much, Aziz. And I want to remind our listeners that you can ask questions of our alumni in the Q&A box, and we'll try to get to as many of them at the end of the program as we can. But now I want to bring in Havi Buzo. Hi, Havi. Good to see you.
So good to see you, Ben, and everybody in Ropes and all the attendees.
And Havi, you participated in our recent Europe-based program for conflict journalism. But I first want to ask you about Syria, which has been a lot in the news today. So we're so glad to have you to provide your perspective. And clearly, there's a lot of hope that people are having for a post-Assad Syria, but also a lot of uncertainty and nerves. And so I'm wondering, what are your expectations for a new Syria? What are your fears? What are your expectations?
I mean, definitely want to say, first of all, it's definitely worth celebrating the demise of the Assad regime and its access. They committed so many war crimes. They've been just complete destruction to Syria and its people throughout their being in power. So we need to take that moment. I think it's really important to understand why people in Syria are so happy, and people who became refugees throughout the last decade are also very happy, celebrating. And I want to point out that people are recognizing too in Syria that even though we have the current situation that has the uncertainty aspect, which definitely I can touch on, but there is a shift that is happening on the ground, because people know that if Israel did not dismantle the Iranian-backed militias in Syria and in Lebanon, led by mainly Hezbollah, that would have never happened. So we are seeing change on the ground in terms of how people are viewing Israel and their own positioning in terms of the regional situation, because this is all part of the so-called axis of resistance, which in Syria particularly, you have a very clear example of the monstrosity that this axis has brought onto the people. Now, the issue that is developing right now, like Ambassador Ross mentioned it and said it very clearly, that Ahmed al-Shara is saying a lot of things, right, in his interviews. And I think that, yes, if those things do get implemented, like if they do actually go ahead and dismantle their own organization, actually move forward to a process where other basically civil society members and for like the opposition, the traditional opposition, basically are in charge of the upcoming stage in terms of what's going to happen in Syria. Yes, this could mean a lot of really hopeful things for the future of the country. But do we know this is going to happen for a fact? No. We do know that Turkey and Qatar are basically now looked at as the dominant group in Syria, but we have to be very clear about the fact that Al Jazeera, for example, continued to glorify the Iranian-backed militias in the region up until like a couple of months ago. So it's not, and there are, the fears that also Qatar and Turkey do fundamentally support the Muslim Brotherhoods, which are a part of the so-called axis of resistance. So there are these concerns. Of course, we're seeing the Trump administration coming into the White House, and how much involvement are we going to see from the U.S. administration is going to really determine the direction of things and how they're going to go. But we do want to take the moment to realize that what happened is historical. And my hope is that Syria would become a part of the moderate Arab countries and part of the future peace that is growing in the region and part of the Abraham Accords. So this is what I hope for and look towards in the future.
Thank you, Havi. And I also just wanted to ask you about your recent experience participating in the Ropes Conflict Journalism Program. I think you're our fifth Syrian alum, so we're really happy to have you in the network. But maybe you could just give people a picture of what the program was like for you and what you took from it.
So when you guys invited me, I mean, as you know, I started Yalla. So Yalla is about bringing people together. It's about sharing different voices in Arab media. Unfortunately, in Arab media, we're not seeing a lot of those different voices, the pro-peace voices, to be amplified and to basically help inspire other people and share the perspectives that exist on the ground. And this is what we focus on in Yalla. So when you guys approached me and I learned about what you guys are doing, it's really incredible because, when you bring people face to face, it's a different level of bridging, right? It's a different level of actually connecting people. And what was really great for me is not only being a part of these conversations, some of them I've never had before, even though I'm a journalist. I was born and raised in Damascus, Syria. I, lived my life just connecting and understanding and sharing stories with the world. But basically having these conversations, some of them are tough conversations, but it's really important to have these connections on a personal level and be part of these conversations, which I actually really experienced for the first time with you guys. So I loved how organized it was. I loved that those conversations were actually being brought in a very kind of clear but also free context where everybody was able to share and kind of connect and bring perspectives that a lot of people, I think, in the participants did not hear before. So I think there's a lot of power to connecting and bringing people together, whether it's via the media or in person, like what you guys are doing. And I think more and more of this is what we need right now.
Thank you so much, Havi. And now I want to bring Manar Al-Sharif. Manar, are you with us? Hi, Manar.
Oh, yes, hi everyone. Thank you for having me.
Yes.
And thank you for what you do every day.
Thank you, Manar.
And yeah, I'm so happy to be here.
So, Manar, I think the world really saw the brutality of Hamas on October the 7th, but one population of people who didn't need to be reminded of that was the population of Gaza, which had suffered under Hamas's tyrannical rule since 2007. And you experienced this probably more than anyone because these thugs put you in prison for the crime of participating in a Zoom call with Israelis. And my question for you is, I wonder, people are looking forward to what's going to be in Gaza after the war. Clearly, the people of Gaza have suffered extraordinary pain. Almost everyone in Gaza has lost a family member. But, we're trying to figure out, is there a hopeful future for Gaza? Can Gaza be something that is an example? I know a lot of Israelis, hoped that after they withdrew from Gaza that the situation would have been different. And so I'm wondering, what's your perspective, especially as someone who's plugged in still with young people across Gaza?
Well, I would start saying that my experience in Gaza shifted also my mind as a person who was born in Syria and used to watch, the Palestinian case only on the television and like, in the streets also you will find people who support Palestine for just many reasons that the media would publish. But when I moved to Gaza, I witnessed that the Gazans not really agreeing with what Hamas do and what is the Hamas regime is, but also they the way Hamas brought itself to take force in power, like that was, not satisfied, something that the people in Gaza wasn't satisfied with from the beginning. And that's what I witnessed. And I witnessed that many people tried to change what was happening through many things. And I thought that this is amazing. I can't, disagree with the people. And I started to listen to them and their stories. And obviously they wanted also peace with Israel. And they remembered the good days they had with Israel and in the past. And that was something I wanted to work on closely. That's why I also joined many calls and initiatives with the Israeli side. And that's why also I got arrested. So I would say that even after the 7th of October, regardless of what the media and the news is trying to tell us, that the Gazans also participated in the 7th of October, I totally disagree with that. I totally agree that until now, the people in Gaza believe that it can be possible to have this relation with Israel, and they need that, and they want that. And they only have the fear of ending the war without really eliminating Hamas. And that's, I think people need to focus on that, and people need to be closer and in touch with Gazans directly to see what's happening on the ground, and that people now are speaking more, and that's what actually need to, be focused on. And yeah, that's what I really think.
Hey, thank you, Manar. And you participated in our summit last year in Tbilisi, Georgia, and actually it was your first time outside the Middle East. And I'm wondering if you could just, in 30 seconds, very quickly talk about what it is about ropes that makes you want to be involved.
Well, my experience revolved around what I witnessed from your leadership and also from the participants, that I saw that you actually bring people together in a way, in a very helpful way, and through educational, sessions, through media, and through so many things, that I think it is important, and that the fact we need to admit that we need each other and we need to discover each other humanity in a way, and we can disagree and we can agree on things, but as Heavy and everyone said, that's something very important to bring to the table. And also what impressed me personally, that you as an organization, that despite the tremendous amount of pain that happened after the 7th of October, you remained positive, you remained optimistic that still that can be possible. And that's what I really value. And thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much, Manar. And just in closing, I want to thank everyone who's helped us make this organization a reality. And, I am the proud grandson of 3 Holocaust survivors. And I think for anyone who directly experienced World War II, the idea that in a few decades, Europe would go from being a continent that had been racked by war for centuries, to a continent that, with the exception of parts of Eastern Europe, where war is unimaginable, I think that would have struck people as completely fanciful. And we believe that the same sort of transformation can occur in the Middle East and North Africa region. We truly believe that. And like I said, we at Ropes are building a cohort of young leaders who share this vision of a post-conflict integrated Middle East. And this view might not be a majority in certain societies across the region. It may not even be a majority currently among Israelis and Palestinians. But there are millions of young leaders across the Arab world who share our vision, and we want to reach out to them. We want Ropes to be the organization for them. So I hope you'll consider helping make a donation to help us grow our work in the year ahead. And with that, I really want to thank you all for joining us today on a weekend and for everything you've done to make this organization a success. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. And thanks to our wonderful alumni that joined us on this call. And I remind you that you can enjoy also on our podcast, the Ropescast. The recent episode was actually with Heavy Buzo, whom you just met. So don't forget to download it. And happy holidays.